Hopefully you have an elite quarterback, tight end, and defense. Just in case you don't, here are some rankings. Quarterback position, we are going to go Daniels, Lamar, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, all tier 1. Now, if you're looking at Jaden Daniels, he's not QB1 rest of season for me. That's actually going to be Lamar Jackson. But this week in particular, you actually have sportsbooks giving the highest implied team total of any team in the NFL, specifically to the Washington Commanders. It's a phenomenal matchup against the Carolina Panthers. You have an over-under in this game, over 50 points. So a really good spot to go ahead and just move Jaden Daniels to QB1, knowing that you have crazy rushing upside. I mean, right now, I believe Underdog has Daniels for like higher, lower, 292 and a half total yards. And obviously, a lot of that's coming on the ground. Lamar Jackson, he'll be QB1 most weeks for us. I mean, if you go through and look at what we've actually had with Lamar Jackson so far this season, this has been the most consistent quarterback in fantasy, where you've only had 2 games fewer than 20 points. And the worst game you've had is at 17.38. So crazy high floor that you have with him. Josh Allen's been very much up and down. Obviously, if the rushing touchdown's there, he's looked great. If the rushing touchdown's not, it's been a little bit tougher. But hopefully we have Amari Cooper playing this week, and hopefully we actually see the Buffalo Bills be a more effective offense. Where right now, if you are looking at sportsbook projections, they actually do have the Bills at 25 points for their implied team total, which is much higher than what we've seen over the past few weeks. And then going over to Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts actually has an implied team total of only about 23.5 points here. Not a super exciting mark, as well as if you're going to go through and if you're going to look at his higher lower on Underdog, it's only at 37.5 rushing yards, which is lower than what you have with some of these other elite rushers. Now, our next quarterback will be Jordan Love. It's going to be a tier below. And the reason for this is, well, I think reasonably you could expect that Jordan Love and Joe Burrow have a shot to be the number 1 quarterback in the NFL this week in terms of total passing yards and passing touchdowns. The issue is neither guy's going to run the ball. Now, you have an implied team total of 25 points here for Jordan Love. Should be a decently high-scoring game going up against the Houston Texans. This does have shootout potential, but both teams have relatively strong defensive options as well. Joe Burrow will be our next QB. Joe Burrow actually has a higher yardage mark than Jordan Love this week on Underdog at higher, lower, 256.5 passing yards. My issue is going up against the Cleveland Browns, where you are favored by about a touchdown. There's an outside chance that in Cincinnati, they look to lean on Chase Brown and Zach Moss in the second half. And maybe this is reminiscent of what we had with Joe Burrow against the Carolina Panthers, where you only get 31 total pass attempts, 232 passing yards, simply because you don't need to throw the ball in the second half. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we were going to have Kyler Murray. With Kyler, he's been very up and down. What we've actually seen is the games that he's missed the top option, whether that's Trey McBride or last week with Marvin Harrison Jr. He has been pretty disappointing, while at the same time, you actually only have an implied team total of about 21 points here for the Arizona Cardinals. So it should be a worse offense than any of the quarterbacks above him in these rankings. It should actually be a worse offense than what you have with any of the other options inside this same tier. The only saving grace that you have with Kyler Murray is you can potentially see him go out there and give you 50 rushing yards, which will make him a little more exciting in a 4-point passing touchdown format. Now, going over to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, yes, is probably higher in this set of rankings than we've had him all year. But also, this is the highest implied team total that we have seen for the Atlanta Falcons at 27 points. And at the same time, going up against the Seattle Seahawks, it's not like there's a spread on this game of 7, 8, 9 points where we can expect that potentially the Atlanta Falcons look to lean on Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier in the second half. No, you actually have the Seahawks with a very high total as well. This game projects to be the highest scoring game in the NFL this week. We know that you're not going to get a ton of rushing production from Kirk Cousins, really no rushing production at all, but I think he has a very realistic shot to actually be number 1 in the NFL in total passing yardage this week. CJ Stroud will be our next option. With CJ Stroud, the projections are just much lower on this Texans offense when you have no Nico Collins in. Like looking at Kirk Cousins versus CJ Stroud on Underdog, they have Cousins at like higher, lower, 273 yards. They have Stroud higher, lower, 253.5. If you're looking at Stroud's implied team total, it's 22.5 points against a very good Green Bay Packers defense that we have seen over the past few weeks shut down opposing quarterbacks like Kyler Murray this past week. Baker Mayfield will be our next QB. Obviously, Baker has been phenomenal. So far this season, you are looking at Baker Mayfield having only one game under 10 fantasy points, only 2 games under 20 fantasy points. And we have seen crazy high ceiling performances, such as week 1, where you get the 4 passing touchdowns, such as week 4, where you get the 2 passing touchdowns and the rushing touchdown, and week 6, where you get 4 passing touchdowns as well. Baker Mayfield has been great. I will say this is a little bit of a tougher matchup going up against the Baltimore Ravens, where you do have an implied team total of 22.5 points. So obviously, y'all know I believe personally that sportsbooks know more than you do. They know more than I do. So if sportsbooks are telling me that we should project out the Falcons to score about 5 more points than the Bucs this week, I will have Cousins ahead of Baker. And then going over to Sam Darnold. Darnold actually has a great matchup. One of my favorite picks on Underdog Fantasy this week is actually going to be Sam Darnold to have higher than 249.5 passing yards. This game also has one of the highest over-unders of any game in the slate. And if you are looking at the Detroit Lions, what we've had throughout the entire year is effectively them being a pass funnel where they are going to say you are not allowed to run the ball against us. Obviously, Dallas last week couldn't do anything with the ball against them. But here, sportsbooks are actually labeling the Vikings as 3-point favorites. Now, the issue, of course, with Sam Darnold is you don't have the rushing upside. Now, if you wanted to tell me on the Sam Darnold higher than 249.5 passing yards, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. And if you go and use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. You'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, and you'll get a free pick as well. Now, if you sign up before the Thursday night game, it will be a Bo Nix free pick, more than less than half a total yard. If you sign up after the Thursday night game, it'll be a different player for Sunday. Now, going over to our next option, we are going to be looking at Patrick Mahomes. With Mahomes, he's been bad. I mean, right now you're looking at a higher, lower 237.5 passing yards going up against the Niners. It's a tough matchup where Patrick Mahomes has a total of 0, and I mean 0 games this season with 20 fantasy points. He has been the most disappointing quarterback in fantasy football. You had the injury to both Rashee Rice as well as Hollywood Brown, kind of tanked this. Now, with that being said, over the past 3 weeks, since you've had the injury to Isaiah Pacheco, we've seen 39, 29, and 39 passing attempts. So the passing volume is actually going up. Against the Niners here, they can potentially look to throw the ball a little bit more. And last week, we saw a season high 331 passing yards for Mahomes. So you're hoping that he turns the corner. I still believe he's the most talented quarterback in the NFL, but clearly the Chiefs, their number one game plan here is to play great defense, run the ball, and be a effective game manager in a way and win the game at the end if you need to, if you're Patrick, which obviously you can do. Going over to Anthony Richardson, it's hilarious to see A-Rich near Mahomes in any set of rankings. The thing with Anthony Richardson is the implied team total is very similar in Indianapolis in comparison to what you have in KC. And with Anthony Richardson, you have more rushing production than Mahomes has. Now, this coaching staff has already come out and they've already told us that A-Rich will be the starter for this week. Now, does this mean you want to start Pittman or Downs? Hell no. I mean, if you're looking at the implied team total here, while it's great, a lot of this should be through the ground where you only have 193.5 passing yards for his higher and lower on Underdog. But I do want to reiterate why you're excited about him is the rushing upside, not because you think he's a great real life player or has passing volume. Brock Purdy will be our next QB. Brock Purdy, really tough matchup here going up against the Chiefs. You actually have the Niners favored in this game. I think you could make an argument to have Purdy up at the top of this tier, but that's why we do these S tiers, right? If you want to rearrange the rankings inside the tier, you do you. Stafford may get cut back this week. Going up against the Raiders, though, you're 7-point favorites. I'd expect them to run the ball consistently. Jared Goff, you actually have the toughest matchup you're going to see all year. I think the Minnesota Vikings, especially coming out of the bye with this coaching staff, very easy to say they have a top 3 defensive unit. Geno Smith should be in a very high-scoring game environment. I think you could very easily put Geno Smith at the very top of this tier as well, but I don't want to reiterate. That's why these are tiers. And then Lawrence, Daniel Jones, Justin Herbert right after this. You can throw Rodgers in here at the end as well if Devontae Adams is going to play this week. Now, secondary to this, obviously, make sure if Justin Fields does end up starting, Fields is in your rankings here. But for me personally, I think that's a very tough thing to project, knowing that I mean, I don't know. Right now, the coaching staff's telling us it's going to be Russ. Now, going over to our tight ends, Travis Kelce will be the number one option. Post Rashee Rice injury, Kelce has been absolutely absurd. He's in his own tier. You're looking at back-to-back weeks here with 9-10 targets. While yes, it's a tough matchup against the Niners, you have the highest higher lower of any tight end in the NFL this week at 60.5 receiving yards. The issue with Kelce in comparison to Kittle is George Kittle has had all the touchdowns at the tight end position. Legitimately, George Kittle has had 5 touchdowns this season. Travis Kelce has had 0. Trey McBride has had 0. Brock Bowers has had 1. Evan Ingram has had 0. Sam Laporta has had 1. Kyle Pitts has had 1. Dalton Kincaid has had 1. You add up all the players here inside the top 8 of these rankings, and they cannot match what George Kittle has given you. Now, of course, we do know that touchdowns are probably the most volatile statistic in fantasy football. While he has been scoring touchdowns at a very high clip, it's by no means a guarantee. Like right now, he actually has a 1.34x multiplier to score a touchdown against KC. So probably touchdowns do come down here a bit. Trey McBride will be our next option. Obviously, if you have no Marvin Harrison, McBride's going to be just a dominant force in terms of the raw opportunity he has in Arizona. Now, if Harrison does play, maybe you move him behind Brock Bowers, because Bowers, you have no Devontae Adams. We know that for sure. Over the past 2 weeks, he's had 22 targets. The issue is this is just an absolute dumpster fire of an offense. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we are going to go with Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram just had 10 receptions this past week. I mean, let me double check, but I believe the only other tight end to have done this is actually none of them. I mean, Evan Ingram, in terms of the top 10 or so tight ends, has given you the best week all year in terms of the reception volume. Obviously, we know Evan Ingram doesn't have a ton of touchdown upside based off his historical touchdown rate. And at the same time, if you're looking at the fact that it's the Jags offense that has been a train wreck, but you actually do have an implied team total of 24.5 points this week. Sam Laporta will probably slide in over Evan Ingram in my rest of season rankings just because I have an embarrassing amount of Sam Laporta with my own teams. But with that being said, should you start Sam Laporta over at Evan Ingram this week? Probably not. Laporta has a very tough matchup, and Evan Ingram has had more volume as well. Now, Kyle Pitts will be our next option. If you are looking at Kyle Pitts, he's been consistent with the target volume you've had. You've had 4 to 5 targets pretty much every single week. And at the same time, this does project out to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL. So, I mean, it's okay. Dalton Kincaid will be our next option. With Kincaid, over the past 3 weeks, we've seen 7 targets, which is great here coming from Josh Allen in an offense that we'd assume has more touchdown upside than most. But now if you have Amari Cooper coming in, possibly the target volume comes down just a tad for Kincaid. And then Tucker Kraft, we talked about it last week, but the fundamental issue is when you add in additional wide receivers here in Green Bay, obviously you'll be in a situation in which the targets to the tight end position do come down just a bit. Now, with that being said, seems like Dontavian Wicks may miss, and Tucker Kraft still is playing one of the better offenses in the league, and we've seen a crazy high ceiling. Now, going down to our next tier, David Njoku's up to 74% of the snaps in Cleveland this past week. Seems like David Njoku should be fully healthy going into week 7. The issue is this projects out to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. While you do have a safe role because Amari Cooper's gone, you're going to get the extra target or two. I mean, at the end of the day, you're in an offense with the worst quarterback in the NFL currently. Pat Freiermuth, going over to Russell Wilson, I think we can say, okay, maybe the passing volume has a slight uptick in comparison to Justin Fields, because we do know that obviously Russ is not going to rush the ball as much as Fields would. But at the same time, you have an implied team total about 18.5 points here, so it should be a bad offense. And Freiermuth has had one game all year with double-digit fantasy points, and if you watch the Flock League, you know that this man screwed me. Zach Ertz will be our next name. Zach Ertz has had 2 games with double-digit fantasy points, but the best game that we've had was this past week with 10.8 total points. Here going up against the Carolina Panthers, like we said at quarterback, you do have the Commanders projecting out to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL this week. So if you really wanted to start Ertz, you can. Dalton Schultz will be our next guy. Schultz has had 0 games with double-digit fantasy points, but over the past 2 weeks with no Nico Collins, he's been averaging 7 targets a game, decent quarterback play, so he's somewhat interesting. Cade Otton's had 1 game with double-digit fantasy points. He's playing like 100% of the snaps, but he's been the most inefficient tight end pretty much over the past 3 years in the entire NFL. With Hunter Henry, there's a chance that you have some life in New England with Drake May taking over as the starting quarterback. You do have an implied team total of 18.5 points here against Jacksonville. This is the highest mark I believe we've seen from New England all year. Obviously, it's a good matchup. The Jags are a garbage defense, but also maybe May has a little bit of upside. Isaiah Likely, our next guy, boom bust tight ends in a 3-man tight end by committee. Same thing with Mark Andrews. And then Tyler Conklin at the very end. Conklin had a nice little stretch of heavily targeted games in weeks 3, 4, and 5. But obviously, now that we expect Devontae Adams to take a high target share, I think you have to move him down dramatically. Going over to defense, I say this every single week. I'm trying my absolute best here, but the reality is I went without playing with defenses in fantasy football from 2017 through 2023. This is my first year playing with defenses again. So I'm pretty bad at this. I just drafted the Niners and I've been starting them every week. Tier 1, we're going to have the Broncos against the Saints team with Spencer Rattler and no receivers. We'll have the Bills against the Tennessee Titans, who have the lowest implied team total of any team in the NFL. And we'll have the New York Jets going up against Russell Wilson, where the Jets have had a pretty strong defense so far this season in terms of generating sacks. Now, our next tier, we're going to be led off with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers, obviously a top 5 defense so far this year and extremely consistent, where in my league settings, they've actually had 5 games with double-digit points. The New Orleans Saints will be the next defense that we have. The Saints have been a top 10 defense in total points. You're going up against Bo Nix, obviously favorable matchup, especially on a Thursday night. The Cincinnati Bengals going up against the Cleveland Browns, who look like they are straight up giving up with no Amari Cooper. But with that being said, even though the Browns have the second lowest implied team total, or the third lowest implied team total of any team in the NFL this week, the Bengals defense has been garbage, especially at generating turnovers. The Rams defense has been garbage at generating turnovers, but with that being said, you're going up against the Raiders, who have only an implied team total of 18 points. The Jags defense has been absolutely garbage as well. But it's a London game where you're acclimated. We know the London games, you get a little bit of a randomness thrown in. And at the same time, the Patriots only have an implied team total of 18.5 points. So you can go with them. The Vikings defense, clearly the number 1 defense on the season. It's not even remotely close. They have been phenomenal top to bottom. I mean, it is legitimately absurd what they have done this season. 2 interceptions week 1, an interception week 2. 2 interceptions week 3, 3 interceptions week 4, and 3 interceptions in week 5. The Vikings defense have been by far and away the best defense in the NFL. Now, if you're looking at the implied team totals that the Lions have, they are almost up at 24 points. Obviously, the Lions have one of the best offenses in the league. The Vikings have the best defense in the league. Still definitely think if you have the Vikings defense, you obviously don't pick up a streamer. You just start them. The Chargers defense has been kind of middle of the road, but in this matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, where we're assuming that you have no Marvin Harrison Jr., could be a good spot. The Indianapolis Colts have had a bad defense this season, but you're playing a Miami Dolphins team with no Tua, which obviously the Dolphins have been just absolutely trash. I have the Niners going up against the Chiefs. The Niners have been a top 5 defense so far this year. So this is something that I'm personally struggling with. Like, I knew if I have the Vikings, obviously there's no way I pivot. But having the Niners going up against the Chiefs, is there a possibility of it making sense for me to pick up the Rams and stream the Rams this week? Because if you look at the Niners going into the future as well, it's not just a cakewalk schedule they have. It does get relatively tough. The Chiefs will be our next defense. Obviously, strong defense so far this season. Tough matchup here against the Niners. The Packers have had a phenomenal defense so far this year. Going up against Houston, I actually think we should move the Packers ahead of the Chiefs. I think the Packers actually should be the 13th option. Much better rest of season, of course. The Eagles have been a garbage defense. Decent matchup against the Giants, though. The Ravens have been in whatever defense. Going up against the Bucs should be a higher scoring game. But I hope I was able to help you out. And of course, if you wanted to check out any of those picks that we were talking about on Underdog Fantasy, my favorite right now is Sam Darnold to have at least 250 passing yards this week. You can find the link to that in the description in the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. You'll get a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. And at the same time, you are going to be getting a free pick. If you sign up before the Thursday night game, that'll be a free Bo Nix pick, more than less than half a total yard. If you sign up after the Thursday night game, it'll be a different player for Sunday. But I appreciate you and really hope that I was able to help you out in some way here. And I really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.